Chinese president holds talks with Slovak president and says China is willing to work with Slovakia to build a stable, resilient, strategic partnership. Multiple deaths reported in explosion and massive damage reported in the wake of Japan earthquake. And Nigeria, Ghana and South Africa intensify diplomatic efforts to ease tensions after weeks of xenophobic violence in South Africa. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN, wherever you're tuning in. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Joining me now with your business headlines is Ramanyang.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. The International Monetary Fund has unlocked the final disbursement in Ghana's economic bailout loan. And the baby powder maker Johnson & Johnson offers up to $5.5 billion to settle lawsuits in the United States that link its products to ovarian cancer. We'll have the data and the details of those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Mahia.
Right, Rama, thank you. We begin in Beijing, where Chinese President Xi Jinping has held a welcoming ceremony for his Slovak counterpart, Peter Pellegrini, at the Great Hall of the People.
The Slovak president is on a state visit to China from July the 27th to the 29th. This is his first visit to China since taking office. A 21-gun salute was fired in Tiananmen Square. A military band played the national anthems of China and Slovakia. Accompanied by President Xi, President Pellegrini reviewed the honor guard of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. President Pellegrini is visiting China at the invitation of President Xi Jinping.
Well, the presidents have already held talks. Xi Jinping hailed the strength of their bilateral relations. He said the mutual trust between the two countries continues to deepen, while their friendship is taking deep root in the hearts of the two peoples. Here's more.
During talks, Xi Jinping said China stands ready to work with Slovakia to foster a bilateral strategic partnership featuring mutual respect, trust and resilience. He also outlined 4 priority areas for cooperation moving forward. First, to consolidate strategic mutual trust and offer each other firm support. Xi said despite differences in political systems, China and Slovakia respect each other's chosen development paths and uphold friendship and cooperation as the mainstream of bilateral relations. He said China appreciates Slovakia's adherence to the One China principle and will continue to fully accommodate each other's core interests and major concerns. Second, to deepen mutually beneficial cooperation and achieve common development. Xi noted that Slovakia has taken an active part in the Belt and Road Initiative and the China, Central and Eastern European countries cooperation, yielding substantial results. He said the two sides should better leverage mechanisms such as the Intergovernmental Cooperation Commission to provide policy support for deeper cooperation, tap cooperation potential in emerging sectors including clean energy, digital economy, robotics and AI. Third, to enhance people-to-people ties and carry forward the long-standing friendship. Xi has urged the two sides to expand cooperation in culture, sports, tourism, youth exchanges and local interactions, and continue to encourage youth exchanges to deepen mutual understanding. And fourth, to uphold international fairness and justice and reform and improve global governance. Xi said the two sides should strengthen multilateral coordination, firmly uphold the UN-centered international system and the international order underpinned by international law, jointly advance an equal and orderly multipolar world and universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, and work to build a community with a shared future for mankind. Xi Jinping said China-EU relations face both important new opportunities and quite a few challenges. Whether challenges can be turned into opportunities hinges on conducting equal-footed consultations and seeking common ground whilst resolving differences. He added that China has always viewed the EU as a partner and develops ties with the EU with sincerity and goodwill. He said it is hoped that Slovakia will play a constructive role in promoting the sound and steady growth of China-EU relations. President Pellegrini said China's capability to formulate and consecutively implement five-year plans and steadily advance Chinese modernization is admirable and worthy of learning from. He said Slovakia values its strategic partnership with China, firmly adheres to the One China principle, and looks forward to boosting mutual trust, strengthening cooperation and deepening friendship with China. He said the country seeks to expand cooperation into new areas and secure more outcomes in economy and trade, AI, digital economy, robotics, new energy, and other sectors to deliver more benefits to both peoples. He says Slovakia welcomes Chinese enterprises to invest and cooperate in the country. Pellegrini said as an EU member state, Slovakia is ready to actively promote EU-China cooperation and properly address differences through dialogue and consultation. He added that Slovakia highly recognizes China's international standing and influence and stands ready to work with Beijing to uphold multilateralism, safeguard the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, and promote regional and global peace and stability.
Elsewhere, multiple people have been reported dead after an explosion ripped through a shopping mall in Japan's Kumamoto prefecture following a powerful earthquake that struck the region earlier in the day. Local police say the explosion is believed to have caused a large number of deaths, though the exact death toll is yet to be determined. Between 20 to 30 workers at the largest shopping mall are unaccounted for, and many others are believed to be trapped within the shopping complex. Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi said authorities are still assessing the full extent of the damage. Well, the earthquake in Japan has ruptured roads and injured at least 50 people. Multiple people were also unaccounted for after a chimney collapsed at a Nippon paper industries factory. Broadcaster NHK reported, while two hospitals were each reported to be treating over 50 people, some in serious condition. Operators say several passengers aboard high-speed trains at the time of the quake were also injured. Local authorities say about 40,000 homes have lost power, while railway company JR Kyushu says it has suspended services, including its high-speed bullet trains. Kumamoto Airport also shut its runway, with airlines diverted and flights cancelled. Around 300,000 people have been instructed to go to evacuation centers, and hundreds of soldiers have been deployed to help with rescue operations as aftershocks continue to rumble in the area. On to the Middle East. Iran says it, Oman and Saudi Arabia have called for intensifying joint diplomatic efforts to ensure the security of the Strait of Hormuz. Reuters news agency reports that Oman has presented a proposal to Iran for joint management of the waterway. The proposal is modeled on the management of the Strait of Malacca. It would allow those who use Hormuz to voluntarily contribute to fund navigation, environmental protection and search and rescue efforts. It would also mean Tehran would not exercise sole control of the critical waterway. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington is having very friendly talks with Tehran, but suggests he is not prepared for prolonged negotiations. Meanwhile, Iran says it is not currently negotiating with the United States, accusing Washington of violating the Memorandum of Understanding. In Nigeria, at least 30 people, including 8 children, have been killed by armed men who attacked Naridon village in northwestern Kaduna State on Monday overnight. Residents say the assailants stormed the community around midnight, opening fire indiscriminately. Witnesses say they killed women, children and the elderly before setting homes ablaze and fleeing. 5 people were injured and are receiving treatment. Security forces, meanwhile, arrived hours after the attack. So far, no group has claimed responsibility. Kaduna State has been grappling with violence from armed gangs and criminal groups, raising significant security concerns.
It's the Fulani that came to our village and killed our people. They killed 30 people and 5 of us are hospitalized, as you can see.
We were just sitting with family members when all of a sudden we heard the attackers hitting our door. That was when we realized that they have come again to attack us, and we started hearing gunshots everywhere.
Turning to East Africa now, where Uganda has officially declared an end to its latest Ebola outbreak after going 42 days without recording a new case. Uganda's last locally transmitted Ebola patient was discharged on June the 16th. This meant it has met the World Health Organization's mandatory 42-day monitoring period without recording any new locally transmitted cases. Health authorities say intensive nationwide surveillance continued throughout the monitoring period, with no new infections detected. The outbreak that was declared in the country in mid-May left 20 people infected with 18 recoveries. The 2 deaths involved patients from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The outbreak was linked to the ongoing Ebola epidemic in the DRC, which has so far claimed over 3,000 cases. Uganda has experienced several Ebola outbreaks since the year 2000. Officials say the country's tropical forests, home to fruit bats that naturally carry the virus, leave it vulnerable to recurring outbreaks.
The Minister of Health is pleased to announce that Uganda has officially declared the end of 2026 Ebola disease outbreak. So today, as we speak now, Uganda is Ebola-free. The declaration follows the successful completion of the mandatory 42-day monitoring period, which began after the discharge of the last Ugandan national, a locally transmitted patient, on the 16th of June 2026. Throughout this period, the Ministry of Health maintained intensive surveillance nationwide, and no new Ebola cases have been detected.
Nigeria, Ghana and South Africa have intensified diplomatic efforts to ease tensions after weeks of xenophobic violence against African migrants in South Africa. Over 3,000 Ghanaians and Nigerians have already been evacuated amid demands for accountability and compensation. South Africa says it condemns attacks on migrants and insists those responsible will face justice. CGTN's Caroline B. reports.
Emergency talks with South African officials got underway on Monday in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. The high-level talks focused on repairing relations after the latest wave of attacks on foreign African nationals in South Africa. Abuja, which has been vocal in condemning the violence, says the xenophobic attacks have gone beyond isolated incidents and wants stronger protection for its citizens, openly questioning whether South African police failed to act during the violence.
We condemn in very strong terms what's going on, and we have asked for specific guarantees for Nigerians in terms of activation of the early warning mechanism, in terms of visible deployment of police to areas that are prone to such violence. We've asked for accountability for those who have been arrested. Minister Lamola told me arrests are going on, prosecution are going on. They're going to hold those perpetrating attacks on our national to account.
South African vigilante groups have repeatedly targeted foreign African nationals and looted migrant-owned businesses in recent months. Anti-migrant protesters marched in several cities in June, calling for undocumented foreigners to leave the country. Nigeria says nearly 1,500 of its citizens have been repatriated since the latest wave of attacks. Officials are also compiling claims of businesses and property destroyed, hoping they will form the basis for future compensation talks. Pretoria insists the attacks are not government-sanctioned and says arrests and prosecutions are underway, while also raising concerns over cross-border crime.
The South African government condemns all form of xenophobia, any form of intolerance or related intolerance happening in our country, and that no South African national has got a right to take the law into their own hands. This is the responsibility of the state and the state alone. We have also raised the concerns of the South African government and the South African public with regards to some of the Nigerian nationals in our public system, particularly those who commit crime. And we must be clear, it's not all Nigerians, nationals.
Ghana is also stepping up diplomatic pressure. More than 900 nationals have already returned home, with another 1,000 evacuated at the start of this week, many of them forced to abandon their livelihoods overnight. Accra has secured the backing of regional bloc ECOWAS to take the issue to the African court.
The petition highlights the recurring loss of lives, attacks on African migrants, destruction of businesses, and threats to the principles of African unity, free movement, and continental integration, which we must all admit is the bedrock, the foundation of the formation of the OAU.
South Africa says it remains committed to dialogue with ECOWAS and the African Union, while rejecting xenophobia and promising to prosecute those behind the violence. President Cyril Ramaphosa has also repeatedly pledged continued diplomatic engagement across the continent. Caroline B., CGTN.
Chad has decided to withdraw from the International Criminal Court, becoming the latest country to distance itself from the Hague-based tribunal. It accuses the ICC of limited institutional effectiveness and a disproportionate focus on African nations. Officials note that of the court's 13 investigations, 9 involve African nations, while 6 of the 7 people currently in ICC custody are linked to African cases. Chad's withdrawal comes after Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger began their formal process of leaving the court, citing similar reasons. Burundi withdrew from the ICC in October 2017, accusing it of deliberately targeting Africans for prosecution. The Chadian government says it has formally notified the UN Secretary-General of its intentions. Under Article 127 of the Rome Statute, the withdrawal takes effect 1 year after the UN receives the notification. Chad has urged the African Union and its member states to strengthen domestic judicial systems and a credible continental justice system that protects African sovereignty. Well, for a deeper look into this, we spoke to Ovigwe Egwegu, who is a policy analyst at Development Reimagined, based in Toronto, Canada.
For many years, African countries have had major criticism and complaints with regards to the International Criminal Court. I think there was a very famous case of the past president of Sudan, Omar Bashir, and how that even reignited the debates over 5 years ago now. So this is not really anything new. And like you mentioned in your introduction, Burundi withdrew a few years ago. A few months ago, we saw even states in the Sahel, Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali announcing withdrawal, and now we're hearing from Chad. So this has been a long process because of real observable, you could say, bias in how the ICC has carried out its work throughout the years. And I think at this point, it's the onus on the ICC to reflect on what its legacy has been on the continent and how effectively it has lived to the letter of the Rome Statute. The United States has its own reservations and has not been looking at the ICC in favor for a few years too. If you go back to Trump's first administration, there was a campaign against the ICC that because of moves by the ICC then to investigate the U.S. this action in Afghanistan, and now in second administration, we're seeing an even increased move by Washington to cripple the ICC, and a lot of this comes from the ICC's focus on Israel's actions in Gaza. So it comes from a political point of view because it sees itself and allies as not rule takers but rule makers. So it's different from the African perspective. It is actually more a concern about overemphasis on Africa, and almost exclusive emphasis on Africa, and not looking at other cases around the world too. One could argue that with the ICC focusing on the war in Gaza, that had gone a long way to increase the credibility of the ICC, because for many people that remained a testament of real failure of international law, and that is what that perspective is shared by people all over around the world, and states even within the Euro-American sphere as well too. So by attacking the ICC because of that move it has made, I think it goes further to show that the ICC was not meant to focus on some region of the world and just focus on other regions of the world. And for Africans, they seem to feel like they are the ones that the ICC was meant to focus on. So it's a bit of a dire situation for the ICC, and I don't think it's going to come out of it very, very easily without global support, particularly from the global south.
You're watching Africa Live. Here's what's coming up on the program. We look at how the 1951 Refugee Convention has shaped international protection for refugees 75 years on.
Nigeria is my home. Over 200 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, today marks 75 years since the Refugee Convention was adopted by the UN. Officially known as the Convention Relating to the Status of Refugees, it serves as the main international legal document defining refugees and outlining their rights and countries' obligations to their protection. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa has more on the historic pact.
The Refugee Convention was adopted at a UN conference on July 28, 1951. It involved 146 state parties and was created due to an influx of refugees at the end of World War II. The treaty establishes the legal definition of the term refugee and outlines their basic rights. It also defines the legal obligations of states to protect refugees' rights and the assistance they are entitled to. Further, the treaty establishes non-refoulement as a core principle. This means refugees shouldn't be returned to the countries where they face threats to their life and freedom. But 75 years on, questions abound as to whether it is still relevant in a fast-changing world. Currently, the UN estimates that there are over 117 million displaced people worldwide. Of those, about 68.7 million are displaced within their own countries. Aid organizations point out that internally displaced people cannot enjoy all of the convention's protections because it legally requires a person to cross an international border to be termed a refugee. However, even as gaps remain, they also argue that for millions forced out of their homes and countries, the convention provides some protection in a time of great vulnerability. Wilkisa Nyabwa, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Sudan, where Naba Mohideen takes a look at one of the world's biggest humanitarian catastrophes, where millions have been displaced by a devastating conflict which has been running for 3 years now.
70-year-old Fatma fled to Uganda when the war began in 2023. After years of living as a refugee, she has returned home with her daughters after her homeland was recaptured by the army.
We were suffering a lot. There was little aid. We're happy we've finally returned to Sudan. There's nothing like home.
Since April 2023, more than 14 million people have been displaced because of the war. 9 million are displaced internally, while nearly 4.5 million have fled across Sudan's borders, according to the United Nations. But the International Organization for Migration says 18% of cross-border refugees have returned to Sudan since 2025, like Muhammad Tijani, who fled to Uganda but has now returned to Khartoum after 3 years.
Being a refugee has had a lot of impact. It wasn't easy to easily integrate in Uganda. There were many barriers such as culture and language, but people have to try for a better life. Anyway, I'm glad that I am finally home, despite the challenges.
But many of those returning are struggling. Access to food, health care, and clean water is a problem. Funding gaps have hit aid operations, while the fighting continues in areas like Darfur, Kordofan, and Blue Nile. Aid agencies say more needs to be done to fix infrastructure and poor services, but the Sudanese government is keen to encourage more people to return home.
The number of refugees is declining after many regions were recaptured by the army. The main refugee centres remain in South Sudan, Chad, Uganda, Ethiopia, Egypt and some Gulf countries. Those countries have generously provided aid and support despite the logistical and financial challenges. Now we are organising voluntary return trips for those who want to come home to Sudan.
But in Sudan's western regions, there is no end in sight for the war, and the mass displacement continues. For millions of Sudanese who are still displaced by the conflict, the struggle has now become part of their daily life. Whether they remain in refugee centers abroad or plan to return home will depend not only on the security situation here, but on the humanitarian and government support they can receive to rebuild their lives. Naba Mohideen, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Now, thousands of people have gathered in Benin's capital, Porto Novo, for the 3rd annual Mask Festival. This year's edition brought together performers from across West Africa and, for the first time, welcomed artistic expressions from China. This affirms the festival's ambition to become a global meeting point for ancestral mask traditions and cultural exchange. CGTN's Sofia Shimechero tells us more.
The streets of Porto Novo were filled with song and colors as the Mask Festival transformed the capital into a celebration of history, spirituality and identity. It highlighted the sacred mask traditions of the Yoruba, Somba and Beta Maribe communities, as well as others.
We want Benin to be the place where ancestral masks and traditional masks from indigenous cultures around the world can come together and be showcased. We welcome masks from other countries and different parts of the world, making Benin a true international crossroads for this cultural tradition and heritage.
This year's festival expanded beyond Africa for the first time. The Chinese dragon, a symbol of power, wisdom, courage and good fortune, was displayed.
We've been doing this for years, and for this particular Mask Festival event, we began preparations 3 months ago, which has enabled us to put on such a performance.
Visitors from around the world welcomed the free festival, saying it gave everyone the opportunity to experience Benin's traditions. The event also featured iconic masks from across West Africa, including Côte d'Ivoire's famous Zaoli dance, renowned for its elaborate mask and dazzling footwork.
My first time here, and I think the culture is so beautiful. I like all the different sceneries that you can see from the different costumes. So that's why I wanted to see it with my own eyes today this year.
Having been coming here for a long time, I've had the chance in the past to experience voodoo ceremonies, zangbeto and gungun. I'm really into culture, so I like anything that promotes the cultural identity and history of a country and its people, whether in Benin or anywhere else in the world. Masks represent a huge part of Africa.
Beyond the performances, scholars and traditional leaders explored the deeper meaning of masks during a cultural symposium. Custodians of Vodun traditions stressed that these figures are not merely costumes, but sacred manifestations through which ancestral spirits communicate with the living.
What we are talking about is voodoo. It is a spirit that cannot be seen, even if we assume there is a bearer. This bearer, in this instance and in this capacity, is no longer human. He is a voodoo, because he has been initiated. And during the initiation, the spirit of the voodoo was instilled in them and crystallized within them. And at a certain point, that spirit returns.
The 2026 festival demonstrated that although masks differ in form and tradition, they share a universal language of history, identity, and collective memory. Sophia Shimechero, CGTN.
And it's time to get you up to speed with the latest from the world of business. Rama's here with more.
Thank you very much, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in the world of money. The International Monetary Fund has unlocked the final disbursement in Ghana's economic bailout package. And the baby powder maker Johnson & Johnson offers up to $5.5 billion to settle lawsuits in the US that link its products to ovarian cancer. Let's start in West Africa. The International Monetary Fund's Executive Board has completed the sixth and final review of Ghana's $3 billion loan program. That effectively now paves the way for the final disbursement of around $371 million to the West African country. The fund's deputy managing director said Ghana's performance has been broadly satisfactory. Boli lauded Accra's reforms and higher commodity prices for helping to stabilize the West African economy, as well as easing its debt risks. Ghana sought IMF support in 2022. That came after years of overspending and the damage done by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and then high global rates, all of which triggered a severe crisis, crashing the cedi and spiking inflation as the country defaulted on its public debt. Angola's largest telecommunications operator, Unitel, says it has suffered a major cyber attack. Now, according to the firm, the incident in question caused widespread disruption to voice, mobile data and internet services right across the country. The company says it detected the attack early on Tuesday morning, just a day before it's due to list its shares on the Angolan stock market. Unitel serves more than 21 million customers in a country of around 39 million people. The listing of its shares tomorrow, on July 29th, is part of a broader government push to attract private investment and reduce the state's footprint in the economy. Officials say this offering was oversubscribed by more than 20%. Elsewhere, South Africa plans to introduce strict laws banning the importation of products made with forced or child labour. These new regulations are a direct response to the United States imposing a 12.5% tariff on South African goods, not subject to previous exclusions or tariffs. Authorities in Pretoria say they will continue discussions with the authorities in Washington to reduce or remove these increased Section 301 tariffs. Goods that include autos, steel, chemicals, minerals and pharmaceuticals among the items that have been exempted from these much higher U.S. levies.
Yes, Trump is desperately trying to impose tariffs in any way, and he uses every excuse, even if South Africa sends lots of cars and metals and agricultural products where there's no forced labor. But there are problems where if you re-export to the United States something like a phone that has the Congolese children doing child labor or some of the debt bondage or other systems of keeping workers, then you might be in trouble. But I think this is the kind of thing where Donald Trump is simply pretending because he's never cared about the interests of workers.
Now, South Africa's diamond industry is facing a pretty brutal downturn. The mining giant De Beers has halted production at the Venetia, that's the country's largest single diamond mine. That puts over 1,000 jobs at risk as a deeper slump and lab-grown alternatives are eroding global demand for these gems. CGTN's Julie Shire has that story.
For more than a century, South Africa's natural diamond industry helped build a luxury market. But behind the sparkle, the industry is under pressure. De Beers' decision to pause production at its Venetia mine reflects falling diamond prices, weaker demand, and a growing competition from lab-grown stones. Global economic headwinds have hit luxury spending hard, while the rise of synthetic gems has fundamentally shifted consumer behavior.
We have high interest rates, particularly in the US and China. So, luxury purchases have slowed down. The lab-grown diamonds are dramatically cheaper.
The average South African, if they're buying a natural diamond, is only buying half a carat of a natural diamond. Whereas now, with a lab-grown diamond, they can get the 1 carat, they can get the 1.5 carat. And it works, as far as engagements and proposals go.
The biggest impact, though, will be felt far from here, where mining communities now face an uncertain future. The suspension at Venetia puts 1,200 jobs on the line, triggering an economic ripple effect.
One mine worker is able to support a family of more than 10 people. You can also imagine what is going to happen to the communities. It's just going to be a ghost town.
The shutdown complicates an already messy exit from parent company Anglo American, which is aggressively trying to unbundle De Beers after a string of heavy financial write-downs. With multiple African state-backed bidders withdrawing, a consortium led by former De Beers boss Gareth Penny remains the sole contender. For labour unions, the identity of the buyer matters less than the survival of the payroll.
Our interest here is about workers. Anyone who can come and rescue such kind of business, we will welcome. We don't want to see workers, being jobless.
Venetia's closure marks a historic turning point as synthetic stones rewrite the rules of luxury. The diamond cartel that once controlled the global market must now fight for its own survival. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, over in West Africa, young innovators are hailing the emergence of online banking solutions that they say are much more accessible and affordable compared to traditional banking. It's a growing market in the region, but among the strongest players is a fintech company in Cote d'Ivoire. Its founders say that they recognized a huge gap in much-needed financial services for a large part of the population. This is their story.
In his office in the Ivorian capital, Abidjan, Achille Awahi is preparing an advertising campaign and opens the Jamo banking app to see how to make funds available. He says the app has had a positive impact on his communication agency.
I have been using Jamo for the past 3 years for advertising campaigns. It enables us to attract customers across the country and abroad. That is why we use it primarily. When we run an advertising campaign, it's through Jamo that we invest money to attract customers. It really makes our lives easier.
Jamo was launched in 2020 by Hassan Bourguiba and Regis Bamba. They observed that young employees and new workers were finding it difficult to access bank accounts.
You cannot build your wealth on mobile money. It's more used for temporary money to move funds and to pay for bills. So this was our first insight. How can we bring the ease of access of mobile money to banking services? And this is how Jamo was born. And what we're trying to do is to allow customers to never have to step into a branch.
Bourguiba and Bamba came up with the perfect solution, a digital bank that allows customers to carry out all their banking transactions without the need for a lot of paperwork or a visit to a traditional bank. The service is aimed at middle and lower income groups.
Jamo, what we're trying to do is provide better financial services to the underserved. What we've noticed is that a lot of people do not have access to good banking services, And with the trends that we saw in technology and mobile, we saw that there was an opportunity to actually transform the way banking services are given to the population. So we did start as a prepaid card application, mobile app, and then we evolved into a full suite of banking services because we got the microfinance license. So today we do current accounts in addition to the cards, prepaid cards. We also do savings, lending, and investments.
With figures now reaching $6 billion under management at Jamo, more than 50% of its customers previously had no access to a traditional bank. The digital bank offers all the services a traditional bank does, including bank cards.
I'll take, for example, my grandparents. Like 5 years ago, what they would do is pick up the phone and call on WhatsApp. When a few years before that, it was impossible to imagine your granddad using WhatsApp, right? So what you see in Africa is that adoption is actually way faster than probably in other markets. So when you build products, what you have to do is think about the future, right? Not build for what's there, build for the future. And you see it every day in Africa. Great companies are built on internet. So I don't think today you should think it as an obstacle. You have to build for internet because internet is growing fast. And then adapt the value that you give for those people to local context, of course.
The founders are confident that the project will meet the current as well as future demands.
There must be consistency, and a project must meet a need, not just today's need, but tomorrow's, the one we anticipate, and what that need will be. We must remain realistic. They must remain profitable, and they must meet a need.
Building on its success in Côte d'Ivoire, Jamo has established itself in the Senegalese market. It now serves more than 10,000 businesses and is having a significant impact on people's daily lives. Jamo is also targeting new markets in Ghana and East Africa. And even though its resources are limited, it recently launched a fundraising campaign to expand its market. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now then, on to another company. The pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson is offering to pay up to $5.5 billion to settle tens of thousands of lawsuits in the United States. The proposed settlement from the company aims to end years of legal battles over claims that its talc-based baby powder and other products caused ovarian cancer. Johnson & Johnson has always denied those allegations. It's called them meritless. The deal would cover about 76,000 cases, totaling most of the remaining talc-related claims. The company says it'll offer up to $3 billion next year with no additional payments due before 2028. That said, this is just a proposal, remember. It does still require the approval of law firms representing the claimants. Electric vehicles, lithium batteries and solar products are known as China's original new three exports and have powered trade growth for years. But now there's a new trio of high-tech drivers that's taking center stage, as Dai Kai now tells us.
AI, robotics, and innovative drugs are emerging as new drivers of China's foreign trade. Analysts believe they also reflect the country's move toward higher value, technology-driven exports. Perhaps AI best illustrates that trend. During the third week of July, weekly usage of Chinese large models on the Open Router platform reached 36.11 trillion tokens, up more than 30% from the previous week. Chinese models have ranked first globally on the platform for 12 consecutive weeks. But those figures tell only part of the story. AI exports today go well beyond software. Chinese companies are exporting a broad range of digital capabilities, from algorithm development and foundation models to API services and AI agents. Much of that activity falls outside the scope of traditional trade statistics. Perhaps the strongest evidence is its global reach. Chinese AI products are now serving users in 141 countries and regions. Now, the same momentum can be seen in robotics. countries. In the first half of the year, exports of cleaning robots and intelligent bionic robots totaled over 18 billion yuan. Industrial robot exports reached 6.29 billion yuan, up 18.6% year-on-year. The products have been exported to 141 countries and regions, and surgical robots posted even faster growth. Exports climbed to 480 million yuan. Only 11 such globally novel drugs approved in all of 2025. Fewer than half of those were developed by Chinese pharmaceutical companies. Meanwhile, the disclosed potential value of overseas licensing deals involving Chinese innovative drugs has reached around $110 billion. Another indicator of the growing global presence is that Chinese pharmaceutical companies also accounted for 8 of the world's top 10 innovative drug licensing deals.
And we'll leave it there for the time being, but here's what's coming up at the top of the hour. We'll be looking at East Africa. The region is maintaining its position as essentially Africa's fastest growing economic region in 2025. It's estimated to have grown by around 6.6%, according to estimates from the African Development Bank. But can it maintain that position going into 2027? And what are the downside risks to that forecast? Conversation with the economists coming up at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, though, back to Mahia for the sport.
All right, Rama, thank you. Here's what's coming up in the sport. We'll bring you the latest from the ongoing Women's Africa Cup of Nations.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Time for the sport. The 2026 Women's Africa Cup of Nations continues tonight with a Group C doubleheader in Rabat. 2022 semi-finalists Zambia are currently taking on Egypt in the first match of the night. The Copper Queens are leading by a 1-0 with a few minutes left to half-time. Later on, defending champions and record winner